I never imagined a quiet suburban street could feel like a battlefield, but every night around 2 a.m., the war began. It wasn't gunfire or shouting, it was the faint hum of a Tesla charging off my stolen electricity. For months, I watched my bills skyrocket, while the HOA president, Olivia Hartwell, our neighborhood's self-appointed queen bee, smirked through community meetings as if nothing was wrong. She thought no one would dare challenge her. But she underestimated two things: my background in electrical engineering and my patience to collect every ounce of proof. By the time she realized I was onto her, it was already too late. The night sparks lit up her driveway. I knew justice had finally arrived, not from the HOA, not from the police, but from a system I built with my own two hands. Before we dive into this wild story, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and your local time. I'd love to see how far this HOA drama travels. My name is Ethan Cole, and if you had met me just a year ago, you'd have said I was the last person on earth who'd ever get caught up in neighborhood drama. I moved to Pinecrest Ridge for its promise of peace. Wide streets lined with oak trees, a modest clubhouse with a pool, and houses spaced far enough apart that you could sip coffee on your porch without staring straight into your neighbor's porch. Kitchen. After 15 years as an electrical engineer and then a career pivot into cybersecurity consulting, I thought I had left the grind of corporate politics behind. But nothing prepared me for the quiet tyranny of an HOA president who thought the rules didn't apply to her. It began with numbers. My electricity bill doubled over the summer. At first, I blamed the central air conditioning. It was Florida, after all, and the humidity had been brutal. But when I cross-checked the data on my smart meter, something didn't add up. The spikes weren't random. They followed a perfect pattern midnight to 4 a.m., pulling almost 40 amps straight through my outdoor line. That wasn't a fridge compressor cycling, nor a pool pump left running too long. This was deliberate, heavy usage. I set up a logger breaking down the draw circuit by circuit, and that's when the puzzle pieces fell into place. The excess consumption wasn't happening inside my house. It was bleeding through an exterior outlet I'd installed by the sidewalk years earlier. I had put it in for yard work, even got the permit stamped by the county inspector, and kept it hidden neatly behind a hedge to meet HOA standards. That outlet should have been harmless and visible, yet somehow it had become a lifeline for someone else's nightly ritual. Suspicion gnawed at me, so I did what any engineer would do. I turned to surveillance. A birdhouse camera wired into my network, angled perfectly at the curb. 2 nights later, I saw her, Olivia Hartwell. If you've never dealt with an HOA president on a power trip, consider yourself lucky. Olivia wore pastel suits with pearl earrings, never without a clipboard in hand, and she had a smile that could freeze your blood. She'd ruled Pinecrest Ridge for nearly a decade, unchallenged in every election. People whispered about her, how she'd slapped fines on families for toys left on porches, or how she forced one couple to repaint their shutters because the shade of blue wasn't on the approved palette. She controlled the board like a queen, with loyal courtiers, and those who crossed her either moved out or gave in. But that night there, she was slinking up to my curb at nearly 2 a.m. Her white Tesla Model X idling silently with its LED headlights dimmed. She crouched down, lifted a decorative rock near my hedge, and pulled out a splitter she'd stashed. With practiced ease, she plugged it into my outlet, ran her charging cable across the grass, and connected it to her car. In less than a minute, she was back behind the wheel, driving it a few feet forward so the cable was hidden in shadow. I remember my jaw tightening as I watched the footage. The HOA president, the person who fined families for leaving garbage cans out too long, was stealing my electricity under the cover of darkness. And it wasn't some desperate one-off incident, it was an organized system. That splitter wasn't new. She had been doing this for weeks, maybe months, bleeding hundreds of dollars of power right out of my panel. I decided to confront her. Not with rage, at least not yet. I caught her the following Saturday morning as she collected her mail. I walked over with a smile, introduced myself properly, and told her I'd noticed unusual power draws on my system. Then I mentioned the camera. I had seen someone charging their Tesla at night, I said, and the footage showed it was her. I asked politely if she could stop and suggested we work out reimbursement for what she'd already taken. For a moment, her face froze, then transformed. The fake neighborhood-friendly smile vanished, replaced by something sharp and calculating. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. "Your cameras must be malfunctioning. And besides, Mr. Cole, this is a community. We all share resources here. It's an unwritten rule." I stared at her. "Unwritten rule electricity isn't a community snack table. It's theft." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Careful, Ethan. As HOA president, it's my responsibility to make sure all exterior modifications comply with bylaws. Did you get approval for that outlet? Unauthorized work can lead to fines. Big ones. In that moment, the dynamic was clear. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was daring me to fight her, weaponizing the HOA as both sword and shield. If I pushed too hard, she'd bury me in violation notices. If I stayed quiet, she'd keep draining me night after night. I walked away that morning seething. She thought she was untouchable, that her position made her immune to consequences. But what she didn't know was that I had two things on my side: the meticulous habits of an engineer and the stubborn patience of a man who'd already fought bigger battles than an HOA dictator. That was the moment I decided this wouldn't be a simple neighborhood spat, it was war. After that tense encounter by the mailbox, I expected Olivia might back off. Maybe she'd realize I wasn't just some passive homeowner she could push around. But instead, she doubled down. Within a week, I received my first official HOA violation letter. According to Olivia and her board, my exterior electrical installation had not been approved and therefore was subject to fines unless I removed it or submitted paperwork for retroactive approval. I nearly laughed out loud when I read it. The outlet had been inspected by the county years before, signed off by a licensed inspector, and I had the permit documents neatly filed in my garage. Yet here it was, her attempt to twist the rules to protect herself. That letter was just the beginning. Soon after I found another violation notice pinned to my door. My trash bins had been visible from the street for more than 24 hours. Then another claiming the paint on my mailbox post was a half shade too dark compared to the HOA-approved palette. Each violation came with a fine $50 here, $100 there, small enough that most neighbors would pay just to avoid the fight. But I could see the strategy, a campaign of harassment designed to bury me in paperwork fees and stress until I gave up my claims about the stolen electricity. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Walter, an older neighbor who lived 2 houses down, stopped me one evening while I was watering my lawn. He spoke in a low voice, glancing nervously toward Olivia's house. "Careful, Ethan," he warned. "She's been president here for 6 years. Nobody runs against her anymore because those who tried ended up drowning in violations. The Johnsons, you remember them, they questioned the HOA fees last year, and within a month, they had citations for everything from weeds to gutter color. They sold their house and left town." His words weren't exactly comforting. It confirmed what I had begun to suspect: Olivia ran Pinecrest Ridge like a fiefdom. The board was her court, and the bylaws were her weapons. Most residents were too intimidated or too weary to fight back. But I wasn't most residents. Still, my first attempt to confront her through official channels was a disaster. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up with my evidence loaded onto a tablet: video clips of Olivia sneaking up to my property at night meter logs, showing massive electrical draws, timestamps aligning perfectly with her car parked by the lav curb. I thought presenting this in front of the board would force them to act. Surely the bylaws they loved so much couldn't excuse outright theft. The meeting, though, was a masterclass in manipulation. Olivia sat at the center of the long folding table, her allies flanking her like loyal knights. The agenda was a tedious list: landscaping contracts, pool maintenance schedules, whether or not bounce houses should be allowed at birthday parties in the clubhouse. I waited through 45 minutes of mundane chatter until the floor was finally opened for resident concerns. I stood, cleared my throat, and began to explain the issue. I spoke calmly, clearly stating that I had documented proof of someone using my exterior outlet to charge an electric vehicle without permission. As I raised my tablet to show the footage, Olivia cut me off mid-sentence. "Mr. Cole," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false patience, "while we appreciate community concerns, we must adhere to the pre-approved agenda. Property disputes between neighbors should first go through the mediation committee." I frowned. "This isn't a dispute, it's theft, and the person responsible is sitting right here on this board." A murmur spread through the small audience of homeowners. Olivia's smile never faltered, but I could see her knuckles whiten as she gripped her pen. "That is a serious accusation," she said smoothly, "and it is not appropriate for an open forum without prior documentation submitted in advance. Therefore, I move that Mr. Cole's concerns be tabled until a proper investigation can be conducted." Her lawyer ally James immediately nodded and raised his hand. "Seconded." "All in favor?" Olivia asked. 4 hands shot up in perfect unison. The motion passes. Now, regarding seasonal flowers at the entrance, just like that, my evidence was shoved aside, my 3 minutes silenced, my voice swallowed by her bureaucracy. I left the meeting fuming, the tablet heavy in my hand like useless evidence at a rigged trial. As I walked back to my car, Walter hurried after me again. "I told you," he muttered. "You can't beat her at her own game. She'll twist every rule until you're the one drowning." He wasn't wrong. That week, 2 more violation notices arrived in my mailbox. One for improperly stored garden equipment because I'd left a rake leaning against my fence. Another for landscaping not conforming to neighborhood standards, apparently because my hedges weren't trimmed into the exact approved shape. The fine stacked higher, over $800 in total, all conveniently due within 30 days. It was a warning shot, and I knew it. Olivia was sending a message challenge her, and she'd make my life unbearable. But she had miscalculated. She thought her petty fines would break me down. Instead, they hardened my resolve. If she wanted a war, then she'd chosen the wrong opponent. I wasn't going to fight her with shouting matches or pointless appeals. No, my battlefield would be evidence, law, and technology. I started by installing professional-grade monitoring equipment on my electrical panel gear I used to spec for commercial clients. Every circuit logged in real time, every anomaly flagged, every kilowatt accounted for. I added additional cameras with infrared lenses covering every angle of my property line. If Olivia tried her midnight theft again, I'd have her caught 6 ways from Sunday. And I wasn't doing this alone. A lawyer friend of mine from my engineering days reviewed the data and confirmed what I suspected: this wasn't just an HOA spat. In our state, unauthorized use of utilities was classified as theft of service, a criminal offense. If I built a solid enough case, I could bypass the HOA entirely and take this straight to law enforcement. 2 weeks of careful monitoring confirmed the pattern. Every few nights, usually around 1:30 a.m., the same surge appeared: 45 kilowatt hours gone in a single session, adding up to nearly $100 worth of electricity each week. And every time the cameras showed the same scene: Olivia's Tesla nosing up to my curb, her cable snaking across my grass, her figure slipping back into her house under cover of darkness. I compiled everything into a certified letter, timestamps, meter, logs, still frames from the footage, even cost calculations. I sent it to the entire HOA board with copies to my lawyer and a backup in the cloud. If anything happened to me or my property, I wanted there to be no doubt about who was behind it. That was my opening move. And soon I would strike back with something Olivia could never have predicted. The certified letter landed like a bomb. Within 48 hours of mailing it, I could tell Olivia had received her copy. The first clue was the look she gave me from across the street that morning, a tight, poisonous glare that could have stripped paint. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood there, arms folded, while her Tesla sat in the driveway, with its hood popped open, a mechanic's diagnostic tool blinking faintly against the early sunlight. I knew she had read every word of my letter, the timestamps, the kilowatt-hour breakdowns, the still frames showing her crouched at my curb. But instead of backing down, she retaliated harder. That same week, my pool access card stopped working. When I asked the attendant at the clubhouse why, she apologized and said my account had been flagged for unresolved violations. I tried to explain that the violations were retaliatory nonsense, but the poor teenager behind the desk just shook her head. Sorry, sir. HOA policy. I returned home to find 2 more notices shoved into my mailbox. One claimed my front porch light fixture was non-conforming. The other accused me of failing to maintain uniform lawn height, even though I'd just mowed the day before. It was absurd, almost laughable, except for the fines attached another $200 total. Olivia was bleeding me dry, one fabricated citation at a time. Still, she didn't know what I was working on in my garage. When I first started as an engineer, fresh out of college, I specialized in power distribution systems, understanding loads, surges, and protective circuits. Most of that knowledge had been gathering dust in the back of my brain since I transitioned into cybersecurity. But now, it came rushing back like muscle memory. I wasn't about to play Olivia's rigged HOA game anymore. I was going to beat her with something she couldn't manipulate: physics. I sketched the design on a whiteboard in my garage, a custom-built monitoring system wired into the line feeding my outdoor outlet. The system would watch for the unique signature of an EV charger: constant high amperage, steady load over time, a distinct ramp-up curve when the car's onboard system synchronized. Once detected, it would allow the connection to appear normal at first. That was key. Olivia needed to think she was getting away with it. But after 10 minutes, the system would trip into action. Instead of a dangerous short or illegal booby trap, my device would trigger what I called a feedback surge, a precisely calibrated pulse that would overload sensitive electronics without threatening the main grid or my own panel. Essentially, it was a specialized surge protector with teeth. If questioned, I could legally claim it was just a fire prevention measure, and in truth it was. Unauthorized power draws can cause dangerous fluctuations. I was simply ensuring my home's safety. It took me days of tinkering soldering wires, running tests with my oscilloscope, and simulating loads with a custom rig. I borrowed an old EV charger from a friend, hooked it up to my simulator, and ran trial after trial. Too weak and the charger shrugged it off. Too strong and I risked tripping breakers all the way down the street. Finally, after hours of tweaking, I nailed the sweet spot enough to fry an unprotected adapter, but not enough to trigger wider failures. The device wasn't just a circuit. It was a trap built on logic, timing, and my absolute certainty that Olivia would return to her old tricks. The first night after installation, I barely slept. I sat in my office with my phone open to the monitoring app, eyes glued to the feed from my birdhouse camera. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock. Nothing. By 2, I was pacing. Maybe she'd gotten spooked by the letter. Maybe she'd finally realized she couldn't keep stealing forever. But the second night, the alert buzzed. 1:46 a.m. My phone vibrated with a notification. Unusual load detected on exterior circuit 4. My heart raced as I opened the live feed. There she was, Olivia, moving quickly under the dim glow of the street lamp. She bent over, retrieved her hidden splitter, and plugged her Tesla in like she had 100 times before. The car's LED indicator pulsed green as charging began. She walked back toward her front door without looking around, too confident in her routine. I watched the amperage climb steadily on my monitor. 10 minutes ticked by. Then, like clockwork, the system activated. A flash lit up the camera feed as sparks burst from the adapter. Smoke curled upward, and the charging indicator on her Tesla went dark. The breaker held steady on my end. My logs recorded the event with perfect precision. The system reset itself automatically. My property was safe, and her theft attempt had just been turned against her. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling for the first time in days. Months of frustration had boiled into that single moment, and the satisfaction was intoxicating. For the first time since moving into Pinecrest Ridge, I felt like I wasn't under her thumb anymore. The next morning, the screaming started. I was halfway through making coffee when I heard it. Olivia's shrill voice cutting across the quiet street. I stepped outside to retrieve my paper and saw her storming up my driveway, clutching the fried remains of her charging adapter in one hand. Her face was crimson hair, wild eyes blazing with fury. "You did something to your outlets," she shrieked loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "You sabotaged my car. This is criminal damage. I'm calling the police." I stayed calm, deliberately calm, because I knew the performance mattered. "I installed a surge protection system on my outlets," I said clearly, projecting my voice so the neighbors peeking through curtains could hear. "It's designed to prevent fire hazards from unusual electrical loads. If someone was using my power without permission, it may have triggered." Her jaw dropped as I pulled out my phone and played the footage from the night before. The video showed her plugging in the sparks, the smoke. Then I swiped to the power logs, complete with timestamps. "I have documented evidence of you trespassing and stealing electricity," I told her. "I've already sent copies to the HOA board, my lawyer, and a secure cloud server that will forward everything to the district attorney if anything happens to me or my property." For the first time, Olivia faltered. Her red face drained to pale white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She muttered something about unwritten community rules and sharing resources, but the conviction was gone. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her driveway, dragging the melted adapter like a trophy of her own defeat. Word spread quickly. By noon, neighbors were stopping by my yard to whisper their own stories, how Olivia had used one man's garden hose while he was on vacation, how another caught her clipping roses from his bushes. On their own, these incidents had seemed petty, not worth reporting. But together they painted a picture everyone had quietly suspected. Olivia wasn't just a strict HOA president, she was an entitled thief who thought the rules applied to everyone but her. And for the first time, the neighborhood started to turn against her. By the end of that week, it was clear the balance of power in Pinecrest Ridge had shifted. For years, Olivia had thrived on intimidation. Neighbors kept their heads down, paid the fines, and avoided confrontation. But now the curtain had been pulled back, and the entire community had seen their queen bee stumble. The sparks from her Tesla weren't just electrical. They ignited conversations people had been too scared to start. It began with whispers at the mailbox. An elderly couple approached me quietly one morning. "We saw the video," the husband said, leaning in as though Olivia might be listening from across the street. "She fined us 3 times last year for our son's truck being parked overnight. We paid, but she's out of control." Another neighbor confided that Olivia had once ordered him to repaint his shutters twice because she claimed the color wasn't uniform. Each story was a small injustice, but together they created a dossier of resentment. Olivia, however, didn't yield. If anything, she fought harder. A notice arrived, demanding I remove my hazardous electrical modifications within 30 days, or face escalating fines. Another claimed I was in violation for placing unauthorized signage on my property, which made me laugh out loud until I realized she was referring to the tiny security stickers on my windows. It was harassment wrapped in official stationery, and she wielded it like a cudgel. But what Olivia didn't know was that I wasn't fighting alone anymore. After the Sparks incident, more neighbors began to approach me, not with fear, but with quiet solidarity. Walter, the man who had warned me before, stopped by with a thumb drive. "This is footage from my doorbell camera," he whispered. "Shows her messing with my sprinkler system last month. I didn't want to cause trouble, but maybe it helps." Others followed. A young mother down the block handed me a stack of notices she'd received, all citing trivial offenses like improperly coiled garden hose. She looked exhausted. "If you're really taking her on," she said, "then use these. She's been bullying us for too long." Piece by piece, I was building a case, not just against her theft, but against her entire reign of selective enforcement. Meanwhile, I doubled down on my own preparations. In my garage, surrounded by spools of wire and the hum of equipment, I refined the circuit I had installed. It was working perfectly, but I wanted redundancy. I added a secondary failsafe, a high-grade GFCI system that would instantly cut power to the outlet if tampering was detected. I coded a notification protocol that sent alerts not only to my phone, but to a secure cloud server in real time. If Olivia so much as touched that outlet again, I'd know within seconds. At the same time, I began documenting every interaction with obsessive precision. Every violation notice was scanned and logged. Every conversation was recorded with time and date stamps. I even photographed my property daily to prove compliance. My background in cybersecurity made it second nature to create airtight records. I wasn't just defending myself. I was preparing for war in court if it came to that. The legal angle wasn't far behind. My lawyer friend Marcus reviewed the evidence and confirmed what I already knew. Olivia's behavior crossed the line from overzealous HOA management into criminal territory. Utility theft, trespassing, harassment, abuse of power, it was a pattern, not an isolated incident. "But you need to show damages," Marcus said. "Courts move faster when there's measurable harm. I had that in spades. My power logs showed over $1 200 inches stolen electricity over the summer alone. Add in the bogus violation fines, and the blocked amenities and the financial damages were undeniable." Marcus suggested drafting a formal cease and desist letter, warning Olivia and the HOA board that legal action was imminent unless they addressed the misconduct. He even hinted at a potential class action lawsuit if other neighbors joined in. When Olivia realized her intimidation tactics weren't working on me, she tried a new approach: public shaming. At the next HOA meeting, she brought up my aggressive modifications and claimed I was endangering the neighborhood with untested electrical experiments. She gestured dramatically toward me, painting a picture of a reckless tinkerer whose devices could burn down the block. I waited until she was finished, then calmly connected my tablet to the projector. On the screen, I displayed the county inspection documents complete with official stamps. Next, I pulled up video clips of Olivia stealing electricity, each time-stamped, each accompanied by power logs. Murmurs filled the room. "This," I said, pointing at the footage, "isn't community spirit. This is theft." And this, I tapped another file, showing her yelling at me in my driveway, "is harassment." I've compiled over 2 months of evidence, and my lawyer has it all. If this board refuses to act, I will take it to the county sheriff and the district attorney. For a moment, silence hung over the room. Olivia's smile was gone. Her allies looked uneasy, eyes flicking between her and the screen. She tried to regain control, calling my evidence manipulated and taken out of context, but the seed had been planted. People were beginning to see the emperor had no clothes. That night as I walked home, Walter caught up with me again. This time he wasn't warning me, he was grinning. "You've got her rattled," he said. "And trust me, rattled people make mistakes." He was right, because Olivia's next move would be the biggest mistake of all. She thought she could bury me under paperwork and fear. She thought she could manipulate the narrative in public meetings. But what she didn't understand was that every step she took, I was already 2 steps ahead, documenting, logging, preparing, and soon the trap I'd laid wasn't just going to protect my outlets. It was going to dismantle her entire stranglehold on Pinecrest Ridge. As I locked up my garage that night, the quiet hum of my monitoring system in the background, I felt something I hadn't felt since moving here, hope. Because for the first time, Olivia Hartwell wasn't the one pulling the strings. I was. 3 nights passed without a blip on my phone. The neighborhood was quiet, the street lamps humming my cameras, recording nothing but raccoons rustling in the hedges. I began to wonder if Olivia had finally gotten the message. Maybe the fried adapter had scared her off for good. But on the fourth night, 1:47 a.m., on the dot, my phone buzzed with the alert I'd been waiting for. Unusual load detected, exterior circuit 4. I was already awake. I had the live camera feed open, a mug of black coffee cooling on my desk. The screen showed Olivia's white Tesla nosing up to the curb like a predator returning to a watering hole. She moved quickly, glancing left and right before kneeling at the hedge. Out came the replacement adapter, sleeker, newer, probably expensive. She plugged it in, ran the cable to her car, and disappeared into the shadows. She must have thought my surge protector was a one-time trick, a fluke. On my monitor, the amperage climbed steadily, matching the familiar EV charging profile I'd programmed the system to recognize. 10 minutes ticked by. Then, exactly as designed, the circuit armed itself and fired the feedback surge. The effect was immediate. A burst of white light flared from the adapter, followed by a shower of sparks. Smoke curled into the cool night air, as the Tesla's charging port snapped off with an audible pop captured by my camera's microphone. On my panel, every breaker held steady. The system had done its job perfectly. My logs recorded everything: voltage, amperage, timestamp, even a thermal snapshot from the sensor I'd installed above the outlet. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Months of harassment, bogus fines, and stolen electricity had culminated in this moment. My trap hadn't just protected my property, it had documented beyond any doubt Olivia's illegal actions. The next morning was pure theater. I stepped outside to get my paper and found Olivia marching up my driveway, clutching the charred remains of her second adapter like a dead animal. Her hair was disheveled, pearl earrings askew, fury etched into every line of her face. "You sabotaged my car," she shouted, loud enough for neighbors to peek through blinds. "This is criminal damage. I'll have you arrested and fined into oblivion." I held up my phone, calmly playing the footage from the night before, Olivia plugging in, sparks flying, smoke rising. Then I flipped to the power logs. "This," I said, "is a surge protection system designed to prevent fire hazards from unauthorized electrical loads. If someone was using my power without permission, it may have triggered. I've already sent this evidence to my lawyer, the HOA board, and a secure server that will forward everything to the district attorney if anything happens to me or my property." For the first time since moving here, I saw real fear flicker across her eyes. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then turned on her heel and stalked back to her driveway. By noon, the neighborhood grapevine was buzzing. Walter texted me a single line: "You've started something big." And he was right. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to began stopping by to share their own stories. One elderly woman whispered that Olivia had been using her garden hose while she was away visiting her daughter. Another said she'd caught Olivia clipping roses from his bushes for an HOA event. Individually, these incidents had seemed petty, not worth the hassle of reporting. But together they painted a portrait of a woman who thought she was untouchable. Meanwhile, Olivia was dealing with her own private nightmare. According to gossip that trickled back to me, she'd had the Tesla towed to the nearest service center where technicians discovered multiple failures in the charging system. The power conversion module, the control boards regulating the battery, even the charge port assembly, all fried. The estimate for repairs was over $6,000, and when she tried to claim it on her homeowner's insurance, the adjuster denied coverage after learning the damage occurred during what could be classified as theft of service. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That weekend, a special HOA meeting was called. Officially, it was to address concerns about community compliance and electrical safety. Unofficially, everyone knew what it was really about. The room was packed, more residents than I'd ever seen at a meeting before. Olivia sat at the center table, but this time there was no clipboard, no smile. Her allies on the board shifted uncomfortably as whispers filled the room. When the floor opened for comments, Walter spoke first. "I've lived here 15 years, he said, voice trembling but loud. "I've seen fines handed out for ridiculous things while the real problems got ignored. Enough is enough." A ripple of applause spread through the crowd. Others followed: young parents, retirees, even a few of Olivia's former supporters, each recounting their own run-ins with her selective enforcement. Finally, I stood. "This isn't about lawn heights or mailbox colors," I said, holding up my tablet. "It's about abuse of power and theft. I've documented months of illegal electricity use by our HOA president. I've sent the evidence to my lawyer and to law enforcement. We either act as a community now, or we let this continue." Silence fell. Then one of the board members, a usually timid man named Robert, cleared his throat. "I move that we initiate an independent investigation and suspend President Hartwell pending the outcome." Hands shot up 1, 2, 3, 4. Only Olivia stayed down. The motion passed. I walked out of that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in months: vindication. But even as the cool evening air hit my face, I knew this wasn't over. Olivia Hartwell wasn't the kind of person to surrender gracefully. She still had allies, still had tricks up her sleeve. And if there was one thing my engineering career had taught me, it was this: systems don't fail all at once. They fail in stages under pressure until something finally snaps. And in Pinecrest Ridge, the snapping point was coming. The suspension of Olivia Hartwell should have been the end of the story. For the first time in nearly a decade, she no longer held the HOA gavel, and the neighborhood buzzed with cautious optimism. People lingered longer at the mailboxes, smiling more freely, their conversations no longer hushed. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could all go back to living normal lives. But I underestimated her. Olivia wasn't the type to retreat quietly. Days after the meeting, new letters began circulating, anonymous, unsigned, but dripping with venom. They accused me of tampering with community utilities, of being reckless with dangerous electrical contraptions. One even claimed I had endangered neighborhood children by installing illegal wiring. I knew Olivia's style the moment I read them. She was trying to poison the well, to turn doubt back in her favor. Then came the vandalism. One morning I stepped outside to find deep scratches down the side of my truck, the paint gouged as though someone had dragged a key across it. The same day, my security cameras caught a shadowy figure yanking up the for sale sign in another neighbor's yard and tossing it into the bushes. The image wasn't clear enough for police to act on, but the timing was suspicious. Olivia wanted chaos, and she wanted me blamed for it. I refused to play her game. Instead, I leaned into what I knew best: documentation and exposure. I uploaded clips of the vandalism scans of the letters and my meticulous violation logs into a shared drive accessible by every board member and any neighbor who asked. Transparency became my shield. If Olivia wanted to wage a smear campaign, I would counter with facts time-stamped and indisputable. Meanwhile, her Tesla debacle only grew worse. Word spread that the service center had given her a final repair bill north of $6,500, and when she tried to argue the insurance denial, the adjuster had pointed directly to my evidence package. Utility theft, he'd told her flatly. Exclusion clause. You're liable. For a woman obsessed with control, being hit in the wallet stung more than any public shaming. The community mood shifted further when neighbors realized Olivia's antics had real financial consequences for everyone. The HOA's legal budget, funded by our dues, was quietly draining under the weight of her personal battles. When I revealed this at the next open forum, murmurs turned into outrage. "Our money is paying for her mess," one resident shouted. Heads nodded all around. The tide was no longer just turning, it was surging. But Olivia still had one last card to play: intimidation. 2 nights after that meeting, my monitoring app pinged at 2:11 a.m. I expected another theft attempt, but when I checked the camera feed, I froze. It wasn't Olivia at the hedge this time, it was 2 younger men, faces obscured by hoodies, lingering near my driveway. They didn't plug anything in. Instead, one of them sprayed something across my garage door, while the other snapped a photo. By the time I made it outside, they were gone. In the morning light, I saw the words scrawled in dripping black paint: rat. I called the sheriff's office immediately, handing over the footage. The deputy recognized one of the figures, a nephew of Olivia's, who had been arrested before for petty vandalism. That connection tied the incident directly to her, and though she denied involvement, the damage was done. What had been whispers about her bullying now looked like orchestrated retaliation. That was the final straw for many in Pinecrest Ridge. Within days, a petition circulated calling for a full removal vote. Signatures piled up faster than I expected, dozens in a single evening, even from families who had once been staunchly loyal to Olivia. People were tired of the fear, tired of the hypocrisy, tired of paying the price for her vendettas. The emergency vote was set for the following Saturday. That night, as I stood in my garage, reviewing the mountain of evidence, video clips, violation notices, insurance denials, vandalism reports, I realized this had become much larger than a battle over stolen electricity. It was about accountability, about showing that even the most entrenched bully could be toppled when people refused to bow. On the morning of the vote, the clubhouse was overflowing. Folding chairs had to be pulled from storage, and residents lined the walls, arms crossed, eyes locked on the board. Olivia sat stiffly at the center table, a pale imitation of the confident president she had once been. Her pearls looked heavier than usual, her pastel blazer a flimsy armor against the tide of resentment surrounding her. When the motion was called, the room erupted. Neighbors spoke in turn, Walter describing her threats, the Johnson's story of being forced out, the young mother recounting her endless petty fines. Finally, I stood. I didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself. I moved here for peace and privacy, I said, my voice steady. Instead, I found a system weaponized against anyone who questioned authority. But what happened to me wasn't unique. It happened to many of you. Today you have a choice: keep living under fear or take back your community. When the vote was tallied, the result was decisive. Olivia Hartwell was removed as HOA president by an overwhelming margin. For the first time in years, the board was free. As neighbors clapped and hugged, I caught Olivia's expression, a mix of rage and disbelief. She left the clubhouse without a word, her heels clicking against the tile like gunshots. I didn't expect her to apologize, and she never did. But she was finished. That evening, as the sun set over Pinecrest Ridge, I sat on my porch with a cold beer. For the first time, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer. Kids rode bikes down the street without parents glancing nervously at their lawns. Couples chatted openly about plans to repaint or plant without fear of fines. And me, I felt vindicated. My outlet still stood by the hedge untouched, secure behind its locked cover. The circuit trap remained armed, though I doubted it would ever need to fire again. But the lesson lingered: when bullies believe they're untouchable, they only grow bolder until someone proves them wrong. And in Pinecrest Ridge, that someone had been me. Olivia's removal as HOA president should have been the end of the saga, but anyone who has ever dealt with a person like her knows they don't simply disappear. Power wasn't just a role for Olivia, it was her identity. Without it, she was a ghost, haunting the edges of Pinecrest Ridge, searching for ways back into the spotlight. At first, she tried to play the victim. A week after the vote, neighbors found pamphlets slid under their doors. Each was printed in bold fonts and rambling paragraphs, accusing me of orchestrating a witch hunt and destroying the community spirit. She claimed the Tesla fire had been caused by faulty wiring on my property and that she'd been targeted for her leadership. Most residents tossed the papers straight into the trash. A few left them on the clubhouse bulletin board, where they fluttered like pathetic reminders of her desperation. But Olivia wasn't done. She filed a complaint with the county zoning office, alleging that my surge system violated safety codes. An inspector came out, clipboard in hand, ready to grill me. But when I handed him the signed permits, the inspection documents, and the engineering notes I'd meticulously prepared, he whistled low. Honestly, Mr. Cole, he said, your system is cleaner than half the commercial jobs I see. I'll be writing this up as fully compliant. He left, shaking his head, muttering something about people wasting government time. The failure of that tactic only seemed to enrage her more. Next came the lawsuit threat. I received a letter, hand-delivered no less, from a local law firm, claiming I owed damages for malicious interference with personal property and defamation of character. My lawyer Marcus practically laughed when I showed it to him. She doesn't have a case, he said. You've got documentation, witnesses, and her own behavior on record. If she pushes this, discovery will bury her. He drafted a curt response demanding she withdraw or face counterclaims for harassment and legal fees. We never heard back. Meanwhile, the community itself was transforming. With Olivia gone, the board moved swiftly to undo years of arbitrary control. Fines were reviewed and many rescinded. New guidelines were published with clearer language, leaving no room for interpretation. Most importantly, transparency was restored. Financials were opened to residents, and a new oversight committee was formed. For the first time in years, Pinecrest Ridge felt like a neighborhood instead of a kingdom. Still, I kept my guard up. My cameras remained online, my circuit monitoring every load, and one night, that vigilance paid off. At 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud bang outside. When I checked the feed, I saw Olivia herself, dressed in dark clothes, yanking at my locked outlet cover with a screwdriver. Sparks flew as the metal scraped against the tamper-resistant casing. For a moment, I thought she might actually pry it open. But then the motion sensor lights flared on, flooding the yard with white light. Olivia froze like a deer caught in headlights. Her eyes darted to the camera perched in the birdhouse. She realized she was caught, dropped the screwdriver, and bolted into the night. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office. Deputies arrived within the hour, reviewed the footage, and shook their heads. Trespassing, attempted theft, maybe even vandalism, one said. They drove over to Olivia's house, and though she refused to answer the door, the message was clear. She wasn't untouchable anymore. That incident broke what little support she still had. Even her former allies on the board distanced themselves. Neighbors who once feared her now mocked her openly. Children whispered Karen behind her back as she walked by. And soon a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. When moving day came, the spectacle was almost surreal. Olivia stood in her driveway, barking orders at the movers, her pastel blazer replaced by a plain sweatshirt. Her Tesla, still scarred from the failed repairs, was loaded onto a flatbed truck. As she climbed into the passenger seat of a rental car, our eyes met across the street one last time. She didn't wave, she didn't smirk, she just looked away. The truck pulled out, and just like that, Pinecrest Ridge was free. That night, the neighborhood gathered in the clubhouse not for a meeting but for a celebration. Someone brought barbecue, kids ran around laughing, and people raised glasses to the end of an era. Walter clapped me on the back. "You know," he said with a grin, "I've lived here 15 years and never seen people this happy. You did this." I shook my head. "No, we all did." Olivia thrived because everyone was too scared to stand up. All I did was show it could be done. Still, I couldn't help but feel a quiet pride. The battle that had started with a stolen kilowatt had ended with the fall of a tyrant. My little circuit, born from frustration and engineering know-how, had been the spark that lit a much bigger fire. Later that evening, as I sat on my porch, the air was calm, the street silent, except for crickets. My phone buzzed with a notification from the monitoring system. For a moment, my heart jumped. But when I checked, it wasn't an alert of theft. It was a status update, all circuits normal. No unusual loads detected. For the first time since moving into Pinecrest Ridge, I believed it. But even then, I left the system running. Because bullies may leave, but others can rise in their place. And if anyone else ever thought about stealing from me, they'd learn the same lesson Olivia Hartwell had. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts or the HOA. Sometimes it comes from a man in his garage armed with patience, precision, and the will to fight back. Life in Pinecrest Ridge after Olivia's departure felt almost unrecognizable. Where there had once been tension in every HOA meeting, now there was laughter and neighborly chatter. Kids left basketball hoops out without fear of a fine. Families planted flowers of whatever colors they wanted. The new HOA board, a mix of fresh volunteers and long-silenced residents, promised transparency, fairness, and accountability. It was the community we had all wanted when we first moved in. But the transition wasn't instant. For weeks, the shadow of Olivia lingered. People would still glance nervously when leaving trash bins out an extra day or lower their voices when discussing home projects. Years of intimidation don't vanish overnight, yet slowly trust replaced fear. When the new board rescinded dozens of bogus fines, including my own, the mood shifted decisively. Residents realized the stranglehold had truly ended. As for me, I became something I never expected, a symbol. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stopped me on the street to thank me. Some brought baked goods, others offered to help with yard work. More than once I heard whispers of "that's the guy who stood up to her." At first it felt strange. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted my life back. But in fighting for myself, I had helped free everyone else too. I also knew better than to dismantle my defenses. The circuit stayed in place, the cameras stayed live, and my meticulous logs continued. Not out of paranoia, but out of principle. Systems work best when they're maintained. And besides, Olivia wasn't the only bully in the world. If someone else tried to test me or anyone in Pinecrest Ridge, I was ready. The fallout from Olivia's reign carried on in unexpected ways. The county inspector who had signed off on my outlet stopped by one day, curious about the attention my case had stirred. After reviewing my setup, he asked if I'd be willing to consult with the county on updating safety standards for outdoor power installations. It turned out my homebrew surge trap impressed more than just my neighbors. I agreed, not for money, but because I liked the idea that my fight with Olivia might actually make other homeowners safer. Even the sheriff's office took notice. One deputy called me weeks later to let me know Olivia's nephew, the one who vandalized my garage door, had confessed under questioning. The case was still open, but it tied her name to the act, even if indirectly. "She won't be coming back here anytime soon," the deputy assured me. "Too many eyes on her now." One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset wash the houses in gold, Walter joined me with 2 beers. He handed me one and raised his bottle. "To peace," he said. "To justice," I replied. We drank in silence for a while, the quiet street stretching before us like a promise. Then Walter chuckled. "You know, Ethan, when you first moved in, I thought you'd keep your head down like the rest of us. But you've changed this place. You gave us our neighborhood back." I thought about that. About the endless nights reviewing footage, soldering circuits in my garage, bracing for Olivia's next attack. About the fear, the anger, the frustration, and yet, in the end, it had been worth it. Because bullies only thrive in silence, and sometimes all it takes is one voice saying no to break the spell. Weeks later, as I locked up my garage after another small project, I glanced at the birdhouse camera that had started it all. Its little lens glinted in the porch light, a reminder of how far we'd come. Pinecrest Ridge was no longer a kingdom ruled by fear. It was a neighborhood again. And as for Olivia Hartwell, she became a cautionary tale whispered at block parties, a reminder that power hoarded and abused will eventually collapse. Her name, once spoken with dread, was now met with eye rolls and jokes. The HOA bylaws had been rewritten, new checks and balances installed, and the community was stronger for it. I leaned against the garage door, breathing in the quiet night air, and realized something simple but profound: justice doesn't always come in the form of a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it comes from standing your ground, from refusing to be bullied, from protecting what's yours with the tools and skills you've built over a lifetime. For me, it came from a circuit, a simple piece of engineering that turned the tables and gave the neighborhood back its dignity. And in that moment, I knew I'd never let anyone steal from me or silence me again. This story isn't just about electricity or HOA politics, it's about courage. When you're faced with someone who abuses power, it's easy to feel small, to think compliance is the only option. But bullies depend on silence. Once one person stands up, others find their voice too. That's what happened in Pinecrest Ridge. My fight became our fight, and together we reclaimed our community. The lesson here is universal. Protect your boundaries, trust your instincts, and never let intimidation dictate your life. Whether it's a neighbor, a boss, or even an HOA president, no one is above accountability. If you've ever faced something like this, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, share your experience, and let's build a community that supports each other. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, because there are more battles, more victories, and more lessons to share.